In 1976, a 21-year-old dropout sold his Volkswagen van for $1,500. His partner sold his scientific calculator for $250. That was their entire startup fund. Today, that company is worth more than the entire GDP of France, Germany, and Canada combined. But here's what nobody tells you. Apple wasn't an overnight success. It was rejected. It almost went bankrupt. Its own founder was fired from it. And it still became the first company in history to hit $3 trillion in value. So in this video, I'm going to break down exactly how Apple scaled from literally $0 in a garage to the most valuable company on the planet. The first customer, the first failure, the exact moments it almost died, and the one decision that changed everything. Stay till the end, because the lesson in the last 2 minutes of this video is something every entrepreneur, every business student, and every brand builder needs to hear. Part 1. The origin, where it all started. It's 1971. A 16-year-old named Steve Jobs meets a 20-year-old electronics genius named Steve Wozniak at a summer job in Silicon Valley. These two were an unlikely pair. Wozniak, or Woz as everyone called him, was the technical wizard. He could build things nobody else could even imagine. Jobs. He had zero engineering skills. But he had something rarer. He could see the future, and more importantly, he could sell it. Their first venture together wasn't even Apple. It was something called the Blue Box, an illegal device that let you make free long-distance phone calls by hacking AT&T's phone network. They sold them to college students for $150 each. Steve Jobs himself called it the foundation of Apple, because it taught him one thing: you can build something that challenges massive systems and people will pay for it. But the real story starts in 1976. Wozniak had just built something at Hewlett-Packard that would change the world. A personal computer. But HP didn't want it. They said, and I quote, "It's not something we need to be in." That rejection? It was the biggest gift Apple ever received. Part 2. The first product and the first customer. So Wozniak built the Apple I, a single circuit board computer. No keyboard. No screen. No case. Just the board. And Jobs, being Jobs, immediately saw a business. On April 1, 1976, and yes, April Fool's Day, which is almost poetic, Apple Computer Company was officially founded. 3 founders, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne. Wayne owned 10% of the company. He sold it back for $800 because he thought it was too risky. That 10% stake today would be worth over $300 billion. Now here's the first customer story that most people don't know. Jobs walked into a local computer store called the Byte Shop in Mountain View, California. The owner, Paul Terrell, was skeptical. But Jobs was relentless. He kept showing up. He kept calling. And finally, Terrell agreed to buy, but with one condition. He didn't want circuit boards. He wanted fully assembled computers. Jobs agreed on the spot. He had no factory, no money, no parts. He had 30 days. What did he do? He walked into an electronics parts supplier, Kramer Electronics, and convinced them to give him $15,000 worth of parts on net 30 credit, using the purchase order from the Byte Shop as collateral. He had no cash, no assets, but he had a signed order. That was enough. They assembled 50 computers in Jobs' garage, delivered them to the Byte Shop, and Apple made its first $8,000 in revenue. From a $1,750 investment. In 30 days. That's the first scale. Part 3, from $8,000 to $1 million, the Apple II era. The Apple I was a proof of concept. But Jobs knew it wasn't enough. While Wozniak tinkered, Jobs went hunting for money. He approached Atari's founder, Nolan Bushnell, who passed. He approached HP again. They said no, again. He was turned down by 12 different investors. But then came Mike Markula, a 33-year-old retired Intel engineer who had already made a fortune. He believed in Jobs and Wozniak enough to invest $92,000 of his own money and personally guarantee a $250,000 line of credit. But more importantly, he wrote a one-page document called The Apple Marketing Philosophy. 3 principles: empathy, focus, impute. Impute meant this: people do judge a book by its cover. The way your product looks tells people how good it is. That philosophy became Apple's DNA. In 1977, the Apple II launched. It was the first personal computer that came in a sleek plastic case, had color graphics, and was designed for everyone, not just engineers. Jobs insisted on a beautiful design. He wanted it to look like a home appliance, not a machine. The Apple II was an absolute phenomenon. VisiCalc, the first spreadsheet software ever, ran exclusively on the Apple II. Suddenly, businesses needed this computer. Accountants needed this computer. By 1978, Apple was generating $7.8 million in revenue. By 1980, $117 million. The Apple II had single-handedly invented the personal computer market. Part 4. The IPO, the failure and the firing. On December 12, 1980, Apple went public. It was the largest IPO since Ford Motor Company in 1956. Apple's valuation hit $1.79 billion on day one. Overnight, it created more millionaires than any company in Silicon Valley history. Steve Jobs, 25 years old, was worth $256 million. He wasn't just a tech founder. He was a cultural icon. But then came the failures. Jobs had been working on a top-secret project, the Apple Lisa.
What we want to do is we want to put an incredibly great computer in a book that you can carry around with you, that you can learn how to use in 20 minutes. To design the computer that we want to put into the book eventually, even though we can't put it into the book now. And right now, it fits in a bread box, and it's $10,000, and it's called Lisa.
Named after his daughter. It was meant to be revolutionary, the first personal computer with a graphical interface and a mouse. Priced at $9,995, nearly $30,000 in today's money, it was a commercial disaster. Apple sold only 10,000 units. But Jobs had a backup plan, a skunkworks project he'd taken over. They called it Macintosh. And in 1984, Apple ran what is still considered the greatest commercial in advertising history. The 1984 Super Bowl ad, directed by Ridley Scott, aired exactly once on television, cost $900,000, and generated $155 million in sales in the next 100 days. The Macintosh was a cultural moment. But it wasn't a financial one. Sales slowed dramatically. Jobs and CEO John Sculley, the man Jobs himself had recruited from Pepsi, clashed brutally. Jobs lost the internal power struggle. In 1985, Steve Jobs was forced out of Apple, the company he founded, the company that was his life. He was 30 years old, and he was done. Part 5, The Dark Years, Apple without Jobs. Without Jobs, Apple drifted. They released product after product. The Newton, the Pippin, dozens of Mac models that confused everyone. By 1997, Apple was 90 days from bankruptcy. 90 days. Meanwhile, Jobs had started a new company called Next and bought a small animation studio struggling to survive. You might know it as Pixar. In 1997, in one of the greatest plot twists in business history, Apple acquired Next for $429 million, essentially buying Steve Jobs back. He walked back into Apple, looked at the product line, and canceled 70% of everything they were making. Focus, he said, means saying no. He then did something nobody expected. He called Microsoft, Apple's biggest rival, and struck a deal for a $150 million investment. The Apple crowd booed. Jobs told them, if we want to move forward and see Apple healthy, we have to let go of a few things.
My career has been the work that I've done with Steve on the Macintosh.
That was the moment Apple started its second life. Part 6, the second scaling, $0 back to billions. In 1998, Apple launched the iMac. Translucent, colorful, friendly. It sold 800,000 units in 5 months. Apple was profitable again. But the real second scaling happened in 3 moves that each 10x-d the company. Move 1, the iPod, 2001. The music industry was being destroyed by piracy. Jobs saw an opportunity. 1,000 songs in your pocket. The iPod launched in 2001 for $399. People said it was too expensive. It sold 600,000 units in the first year. Then iTunes launched, legally selling songs for 99 cents. Apple didn't just make a device. They built an ecosystem. By 2007, Apple had sold 100 million iPods and controlled 70% of the digital music market. Move 2, the iPhone, 2007. January 9, 2007. Jobs walks on stage at Macworld and says, every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. He announced 3 things: a widescreen iPod, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet device. Then he said, these are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. The crowd went insane. Nokia and BlackBerry executives laughed. Within 3 years, Nokia's market share collapsed. The iPhone generated $5.4 billion in its first year alone. the fastest product ramp in consumer electronics history. Today, the iPhone alone generates more revenue than all of Microsoft. Move 3, the App Store, 2008. The App Store was the move nobody talks about enough. Apple didn't just sell phones. They created a platform where millions of developers built products Apple would take 30% commission on, forever. By 2023, the App Store had processed over $1.1 trillion in transactions. Apple's cut? Hundreds of billions of dollars. For running a store. By 2011, the year Steve Jobs passed away, Apple had $76 billion in cash reserves. More than the US government. In August 2018, Apple became the first publicly traded American company to hit $1 trillion in market cap. In 2020, $2 trillion. In 2022, $3 trillion. Part 7. The real reason Apple scaled. Now here's the part nobody talks about. The real reason Apple scaled, and it wasn't the products. Apple's competitors had great products too. Microsoft had operating systems. Samsung had hardware. Sony had music players. Google had software. The difference was this: Apple sold identity, not products. When you buy a Nike shoe, you feel like an athlete. When you buy a Rolex, you feel successful. When you buy an Apple product, you feel creative. You feel like a rebel. You feel like someone who thinks different. That Think Different campaign in 1997 didn't feature a single Apple product. It featured Einstein, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Picasso. It was telling you, if you use Apple, you are like them. The second reason, Apple made switching painful. iMessage, iCloud, AirDrop, FaceTime. Each product locked you deeper into the ecosystem. The average Apple user owns 3.3 Apple devices. That's not loyalty. That's architecture. And the third reason, Apple said no more than yes. When Jobs came back in 1997, Apple had 350 products. He cut it to 10. One desktop, one laptop, one for pros, one for consumers. Clarity scaled. Complexity killed. The lesson. So what's the actual lesson for anyone watching this who wants to build something? Apple was rejected, failed, went bankrupt, fired its own founder, and still became the most valuable company in human history. The lesson isn't, have a great product. The lesson is, know exactly who you are. Build for a specific person. Make them feel something. And never stop obsessing over the experience. Steve Jobs once said, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. He wasn't being arrogant. He was describing vision. The ability to see a world that doesn't exist yet, and build toward it relentlessly. Apple didn't scale because of money. It scaled because of obsession. That's why it scaled. If this video gave you something, a new perspective, a new insight, drop a comment below telling me which part of Apple's story surprised you the most. And if you want to see how other iconic brands like Nike, Rolex, and Tesla made it to the top, this channel is exactly where you need to be. Subscribe. The next one drops soon.